I'm Rachel, 28, and I thought our monthly family dinner would be routine until my brother Marcus casually announced he was moving into our house, the home I'd been secretly buying for the past 2 years. What he didn't know was that while he'd been manipulating our parents and planning to steal my inheritance, I'd been working 3 jobs and making sacrifices he couldn't imagine to secure my future. The look on his face when I revealed my surprise ownership papers was priceless, but his meltdown afterward revealed a betrayal that would destroy our family forever. Before we dive into this explosive family drama, I need to ask, have you ever had a sibling who assumed they deserved everything while you got nothing? What would you do if your brother tried to steal your home right in front of your family? Drop your predictions about how this dinner from hell ended, and if you're ready for the most satisfying sibling rivalry revenge story you've ever heard, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, this announcement backfired so spectacularly that it exposed years of lies and manipulation. The Johnson family dinners had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Every first Sunday of the month, we'd gather at our parents' house for Mom's famous pot roast and what usually amounted to a few hours of catching up, gentle teasing, and the kind of comfortable family chaos that makes you feel grateful for the people who've known you your whole life. But lately, these dinners had taken on a different tone. Ever since Dad's heart attack 8 months ago, there had been an underlying tension about the future, about aging, about what would happen to the family home and assets as our parents got older. Mom was 67, Dad was 70. And while they were both still healthy and independent, recent health scares had made everyone more aware of mortality and legacy planning. Marcus, my 31-year-old brother, had been particularly attentive during Dad's recovery. He'd taken time off from his job as a sales manager to help with medical appointments, yard work, and household repairs that Dad couldn't handle while recuperating. On the surface, it looked like the devoted son stepping up during a family crisis. But I'd started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. Marcus had begun inserting himself into conversations about finances, insurance, and estate planning. He'd volunteer to help Mom and Dad organize their paperwork, update their wills, and research long-term care options. He'd even suggested that they might want to consider having one of their children move back home to help with daily tasks and maintenance. Just temporarily, he'd say, until you're both feeling more stable and secure. What bothered me wasn't that Marcus wanted to help our parents, it was that he seemed to be positioning himself as their primary caregiver and decision-maker while simultaneously pushing me to the periphery of family planning discussions. During Dad's hospital stay, Marcus had somehow become the point person for medical updates. He'd created a family group chat where he'd post daily reports about Dad's condition, but when I tried to contribute information from my own visits, he'd correct or minimize my input. "Rachel, you're not here as often as I am," he'd say. "I think I have a better sense of what Dad needs right now." It was true that Marcus had been visiting the hospital more frequently than me, but that was because I was working 3 jobs to save money for a down payment on a house. While Marcus had a stable 9-to-5 position that allowed him flexibility for family emergencies, I was juggling my full-time marketing coordinator job, weekend shifts at a restaurant, and freelance graphic design work to build my savings. I'd been planning to buy my first home for 2 years, and I was finally close to having enough for a down payment. Not just any home, I had my eye on a specific property that had come on the market 6 months ago. It was a modest 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood I loved, with a beautiful garden and enough space for the art studio I'd always dreamed of having. But I hadn't told my family about my house hunting plans. My parents had always been skeptical of my financial decisions, often pointing out that my artistic interests and tendency to job hop made me less stable than Marcus with his steady career and practical mindset. I'd learned over the years that it was easier to pursue my goals quietly and present them as accomplished facts rather than endure months of unsolicited advice and concern. So while Marcus was positioning himself as the responsible, present son, I was working 60-hour weeks and living in a tiny apartment, saving every penny I could toward my dream of homeownership. The irony was that my parents owned their house outright, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood that had appreciated significantly in value since they'd bought it 30 years ago. The house I was trying to buy was worth about a quarter of what their house was worth, but it represented independence and stability to me in a way that living with my parents never could. As we gathered for this particular Sunday dinner in November, I was just 2 weeks away from closing on my new house. I'd been pre-approved for the mortgage, the inspection had gone well, and I was finally ready to share my news with the family. I'd planned to announce my homeownership at dessert, maybe show them some photos of the property, and invite them to visit once I'd moved in. I'd even brought a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Mom had outdone herself with dinner, pot roast with all the fixings, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Dad was looking healthier than he had in months, with color back in his cheeks and energy in his voice. Marcus seemed relaxed and cheerful, joking with Dad about football and complimenting Mom's cooking with the kind of charm that had always made him the favorite child. "This is nice," Mom said as we settled in for the main course. "Having both my kids here, everyone healthy and happy. It's been a difficult year, but we're all together." "Actually, Mom," Marcus said, setting down his fork with a smile, "I have some news that might make these family dinners even more special." I looked up from my plate, curious about what kind of announcement he might have. Maybe he'd gotten engaged to his girlfriend Sarah, or received a promotion at work. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad's recovery and what you and Mom might need as you get older," Marcus continued. "And I've made a decision that I think will be really good for all of us." Dad raised his eyebrows. "What kind of decision?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. "I'm going to move back home." Mom dropped her fork. "Move back home?" "Just temporarily, of course," Marcus said quickly. "But I think it makes sense for so many reasons. You could use help with maintenance and upkeep. Dad shouldn't be climbing ladders or doing heavy lifting. And honestly, it would save me money on rent while I help you guys out." "Marcus, that's very thoughtful," Dad said slowly, "but we're managing fine on our own." "I know you are," Marcus replied. "But why struggle when you don't have to? I could take over the guest room, maybe convert the basement into a proper living space. It would be like having a live-in handyman and companion." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Marcus earned a good salary and had his own apartment across town. He'd never expressed interest in moving back home before, and our parents had always valued their independence and privacy. "What about Sarah?" Mom asked. "How does she feel about you moving back in with your parents?" "Sarah thinks it's responsible and caring," Marcus said. "She says it shows I'm family-oriented and willing to make sacrifices for the people I love." "And your apartment?" "I'd give up the lease. Why pay rent when I could be living here and helping you guys at the same time?" Something about his tone made me suspicious. This wasn't just about helping our parents, there was something else going on. "Marcus," I said carefully, "this seems like a pretty big decision. Have you really thought through all the implications?" "What implications?" he asked, but there was a defensive edge to his voice. "Well, for one thing, Mom and Dad's house is going to be part of their estate someday. If you're living here and contributing to expenses, that could complicate inheritance issues down the line." The room went silent. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and Marcus's cheerful expression faltered slightly. "Rachel," Dad said, "that's a rather mercenary way to look at your brother's generous offer." "I'm not being mercenary," I replied. "I'm being practical. These are things families should discuss openly instead of just assuming everything will work out." Marcus recovered his composure quickly. "Actually, Rachel raises a good point. I have been thinking about the long-term implications, and I think my moving in could be beneficial for everyone's future planning." "How so?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew where this was heading. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if I'm living here and maintaining the property, contributing to expenses, helping with care as Mom and Dad age, it would make sense for that to be reflected in the eventual inheritance arrangement." And there it was. Marcus wasn't just moving home to help our parents. He was positioning himself to inherit the house while pushing me out of the family financial picture entirely. "I see," I said quietly. "And what role do you see me playing in this arrangement?" "You'd always be welcome to visit, of course," Marcus said magnanimously. "But let's be realistic, Rachel. You're not in a position to contribute financially to Mom and Dad's care. You're still renting, still figuring out your career path. It makes sense for the family assets to go to the child who's actually present and providing support. Mom and Dad looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but they didn't contradict Marcus's assessment of my financial instability or his implied claim to their house. That's when I realized it was time for my surprise. I excused myself from the dinner table, telling my family I needed to get something from my car. My hands were shaking as I walked outside, not from nervousness but from pure adrenaline. Marcus had just played his hand, revealing a calculated plan to manipulate our parents' estate planning while painting me as the irresponsible child who didn't deserve consideration in their financial future. What he didn't know was that I had been planning my own surprise for weeks, and his announcement had just made it infinitely more satisfying. I returned to the dining room carrying a manila envelope and the bottle of champagne I'd brought for my celebration. Setting both items on the table, I looked around at my family, Mom and Dad still looking uncomfortable with the inheritance discussion Marcus had initiated, and Marcus himself looking smugly satisfied with his strategic announcement. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair, since we're talking about housing arrangements and future planning, I have some news of my own to share. Marcus waved dismissively. Rachel, if this is about finding a new apartment or something, maybe we should focus on the more immediate family situation. It's not about an apartment, I interrupted. It's about a house. My house. I opened the manila envelope and spread the contents across the dinner table. Purchase agreement. Mortgage approval letter. Homeowner's insurance policy. Property deed with my name as the sole owner. I close on my first home next Friday, I announced, watching my family's faces as they processed the documents in front of them. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, beautiful garden, quiet neighborhood. I've been saving for 2 years and working 3 jobs to make it happen. The silence was deafening. Mom picked up the purchase agreement with shaking hands, reading the details of my mortgage approval and the property address. Rachel, she whispered, you're buying a house? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? I wanted it to be a surprise, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I know you and Dad have always worried about my financial stability, so I wanted to prove to myself, and to you, that I could do this on my own before I announced it. Dad was examining the mortgage documents. Honey, this is a substantial loan. Are you sure you can handle the monthly payments? I've been pre-approved based on my income from all 3 jobs, I explained. The mortgage payment will actually be less than what I'm currently paying in rent, and I'll be building equity instead of just paying someone else's mortgage. Marcus was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This doesn't make sense, he said slowly. You don't have the kind of income needed for a mortgage this size. Actually, I do. My marketing job pays more than you realize, the restaurant work brings in good tips, and my freelance graphic design business has been growing steadily. I've been living very modestly and saving aggressively for 2 years. But you never mentioned. I never mentioned it because I wanted to accomplish it first, I said firmly. I'm tired of being seen as the flaky, irresponsible daughter who can't get her life together. This house represents 2 years of sacrifice, planning, and hard work. Mom was crying now, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of pride or concern. Rachel, I'm so proud of you, but I'm also worried. Homeownership is a huge responsibility, and if something goes wrong, then I'll handle it, I replied. The same way I've been handling everything else in my life for the past several years. Marcus was still struggling to process this information. His entire argument for moving back home and positioning himself as the primary inheritor had been based on the assumption that I was financially unstable and unable to contribute to the family's future security. This still doesn't change anything, he said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. You buying a house doesn't mean you'll be able to help Mom and Dad with their expenses or care needs. You're right, I agreed. But it does mean that I'm not the financially irresponsible daughter you've been describing to our parents. And it means I have options they might not have realized. I pulled out another document from the envelope. One I'd prepared specifically for this moment, though I hadn't expected to use it quite this way. This is a financial plan I've put together for Mom and Dad's potential future care needs, I said, sliding the papers across the table. I've researched the costs of home health care, assisted living facilities, and medical expenses not covered by insurance. I've calculated how much money would be needed to ensure they can remain in their home as long as possible, and I've outlined several ways that Marcus and I could contribute financially to make that happen. Dad picked up the financial analysis, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the detailed calculations and research. "Rachel," he said slowly, "this is incredibly thorough. When did you put this together?" "Over the past few months, while Marcus was helping with the practical aspects of your recovery, I was researching the financial aspects of aging and long-term care. I wanted to make sure I understood what resources you might need and how I could help provide them." Marcus grabbed the document from Dad's hands, reading through my detailed analysis of costs, insurance coverage, and potential family contributions. "This is all theoretical," he said desperately. "You can't actually afford to contribute the amounts you've listed here." "Can't I?" I asked calmly. "Marcus, you keep assuming you know my financial situation, but you've never actually asked me about it. You've never asked about my jobs, my savings, my plans, or my goals. You've just assumed that because I'm younger and less conventional in my career path, I must be less capable." I opened my laptop, which I'd brought in from the car along with the documents, and showed them my banking and investment accounts. 2 years of aggressive saving, careful budgeting, and strategic investing had left me in a much stronger financial position than anyone in my family had realized. "I have enough saved to not only buy my house but also to contribute meaningfully to Mom and Dad's care if needed," I explained. "I've been building an emergency fund specifically designated for family medical expenses." Mom was staring at the laptop screen in amazement. "Rachel, how did you save so much money? We thought you were barely getting by." "I was barely getting by in terms of lifestyle," I admitted. "I'd been living in a tiny apartment, driving an old car, wearing thrift store clothes, and skipping social activities so I could save for goals that were important to me. But I never complained about it because I knew it was temporary sacrifice for long-term gain." Dad was beginning to smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. "Honey, this is remarkable. You've been planning and preparing while letting us think you were struggling." "I wasn't struggling," I corrected. "I was working. There's a difference." Marcus was looking increasingly desperate as his entire narrative about our family dynamics crumbled in real time. "This doesn't change the fact that I'm the one who's been here, helping with day-to-day needs," he said. "Physical presence matters more than financial planning." "Does it?" I asked. "Marcus, in the past 8 months, how many times have you visited Mom and Dad when Dad wasn't in the hospital or recently released?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. "Because I've been here every Wednesday evening for dinner, helping with grocery shopping and household tasks. I've been taking Mom to her book club meetings when her car was in the shop. I've been helping Dad organize his workshop and research new hobbies for his retirement." "But you never mentioned." "I never mentioned it because I didn't think helping my parents required announcement or recognition," I said. "I just did it because they're my parents and I love them." The room fell silent again as everyone processed this information. Marcus's grand gesture of moving home to help our parents was beginning to look less like selfless sacrifice and more like calculated positioning for financial gain. That's when I reached for the champagne bottle and smiled. "Now, who wants to toast my new house?" Marcus stared at the champagne bottle like it was a weapon aimed directly at him. His face had gone through several color changes during my presentation, from confident to confused to pale to an alarming shade of red that I'd never seen before. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just spring this on everyone and expect us to celebrate while you undermine everything I've been trying to do for this family." "Undermine?" I asked calmly, keeping my hand on the champagne bottle but not yet opening it. "How does me buying a house undermine anything you've been doing?" "Because you've been lying to everyone about your financial situation. You've been pretending to struggle while secretly hoarding money." "I wasn't pretending to struggle, Marcus. I was actually living very frugally to save money. And I wasn't hoarding, I was investing in my future. There's a difference." Mom was still examining my financial documents, shaking her head in amazement. "Rachel, honey, why didn't you tell us about any of this? We've been worried about you for months. Because every time I've shared my goals with this family, I get lectures about being impractical or unrealistic, I replied. Remember when I told you I wanted to start a freelance design business? Dad spent an hour explaining why that would never work. When I mentioned wanting to buy a house someday, you both told me I needed to focus on finding a more stable job first. We were trying to help you be realistic about your options, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you were projecting your own fears onto my ambitions. So I learned to stop sharing and start achieving. Marcus was pacing now, his hands running through his hair in agitation. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've been manipulating everyone by hiding your real situation. How is anyone supposed to make family decisions when you're keeping secrets? Marcus, I said, standing up to face him, the only person who's been manipulating family decisions is you. I kept my house hunting private because it was my personal business. You've been inserting yourself into mom and dad's financial planning and positioning yourself as their primary caregiver and inheritor. I have not. Really? Then explain to me why you think your moving back home should affect inheritance arrangements. Explain why you think I shouldn't be considered for equal inheritance because I'm not in a position to contribute financially to their care. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. Because it's true. Or it was true until you pulled this stunt tonight. It's not a stunt, Marcus. It's called financial planning and hard work. You've been working 3 jobs and living like a pauper while letting mom and dad worry about your stability. I've been working 3 jobs and living frugally while building a secure future for myself. Mom and dad's worry was based on assumptions, not reality. But the assumptions were reasonable. Marcus exploded. You job hop, you have artistic hobbies instead of practical skills, you've never shown any interest in long-term financial planning. I showed plenty of interest in long-term financial planning, I interrupted. I just didn't announce every step of the process to a family that has historically been skeptical of my decisions. Dad cleared his throat, his voice quiet but firm. Marcus, I think you need to calm down. Calm down? Dad, she's been lying to us for years. I haven't been lying about anything, I said evenly. I've been private about my financial goals and progress. There's a difference. You let us think you were struggling. You assumed I was struggling because I wasn't living the lifestyle you thought I should have. I never said I was struggling, you inferred that from my choices. Mom stood up and moved between Marcus and me, clearly sensing that the confrontation was escalating beyond normal sibling rivalry. Both of you, stop, she said firmly. Marcus, Rachel hasn't done anything wrong by saving money and buying a house. And Rachel, I understand why you kept your plans private, but we would have been supportive if you'd given us the chance. Would you? I asked. Because when Marcus announced his plan to move back home and essentially claim the house as his inheritance, neither of you questioned whether that was fair to me. The silence that followed was telling. Mom and Dad looked at each other with the kind of uncomfortable expression that suggested they'd had private conversations about this topic. We didn't exactly agree to Marcus's plan, Dad said carefully. But we also weren't sure how to handle the question of future care and inheritance arrangements. So you were just going to let him move in and take over? I asked. No, Mom said quickly. We were going to have more family discussions about everyone's needs and contributions. After he'd already moved in and established himself as your primary caregiver? I pressed. Marcus was staring at me with pure hatred now. You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming in here with your secret documents and your surprise announcements, making me look like the bad guy for actually being present and helpful. Marcus, I'm not trying to make you look like anything. I'm just sharing my news and pointing out that your assumptions about my life have been wrong. Your news is perfectly timed to sabotage my plans. Your plans to manipulate our parents' estate planning? I am not manipulating anyone. I'm trying to be responsible and forward-thinking. By claiming inheritance rights based on caregiving you haven't actually provided yet? Marcus grabbed the financial analysis I'd prepared and waved it in the air. And what is this if not manipulation? You put together this whole presentation to make yourself look like the perfect daughter while making me look selfish. I put together that analysis because I care about Mom and Dad's future security and wanted to understand how I could contribute meaningfully to their care. You put it together to undermine me. Marcus, Dad said, his voice getting stern, your brother's tone is not acceptable. But Marcus was too far gone to respond to parental correction. This is unbelievable. I've been here for 8 months, helping with everything, being the responsible son, and she waltzes in with some papers and suddenly she's the hero? You've been here for 8 months positioning yourself for financial gain, I corrected. I've been quietly working and saving and planning without fanfare or expectation of reward. Without fanfare? What do you call this dog and pony show? I call it sharing good news with my family and providing context when you tried to characterize me as financially irresponsible. Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for support from our parents, but they were both staring at him with expressions of disappointment and concern. Marcus, Mom said gently, I think you need to take some time to cool down and think about what you're saying. What I'm saying is that Rachel has been deceiving this family for years, and now she's trying to make me look like the villain for actually stepping up when Dad got sick. I haven't been deceiving anyone, I said firmly. And I'm not trying to make you look like anything. Your own words and actions are speaking for themselves. That's when Marcus said the thing that would change our family dynamic forever. You know what? Fine. You want to play these games? You want to pretend you're the perfect daughter with your secret house and your financial planning? Good luck taking care of Mom and Dad from your new house across town. Good luck contributing to their care when you're paying a mortgage and property taxes. At least when I move in here, I'll actually be present when they need help. The threat was clear. If he couldn't position himself as the primary inheritor through helpful manipulation, he'd position himself as the primary caregiver through physical presence and make it as difficult as possible for me to maintain my relationship with our parents. But Marcus had just made a crucial mistake. He'd revealed that his offer to move home wasn't about helping our parents, it was about controlling their living situation and, by extension, their estate planning. And I had one more surprise that would end his manipulation permanently. You know that moment when someone reveals their true intentions and you realize they've been playing a much deeper game than you thought? What happens next is where my brother's manipulation became so obvious that even our parents couldn't ignore it anymore. If you've ever had a family member try to control an entire family situation for their own benefit, stay tuned because this is where I pulled out evidence that Marcus never saw coming. I looked at Marcus standing there, red-faced and furious, essentially threatening to use his physical presence to control our parents' lives and exclude me from family decisions. His mask had completely slipped, revealing someone who saw our parents not as people to care for, but as assets to control. Marcus, I said calmly, I think you should know that I've been documenting some concerning things about your recent involvement in Mom and Dad's finances. His face went pale. What do you mean, documenting? I pulled out my phone and opened a folder of screenshots I'd been saving for months. I mean, I've been keeping records of some interesting conversations and discoveries. Rachel, what are you talking about? Mom asked, looking increasingly worried. 3 months ago, when Marcus was helping you organize your financial documents, he took photos of all your banking information, insurance policies, and investment accounts. I saw him doing it during one of my Wednesday visits. So? Marcus said defensively. I needed that information to help them with planning. Did you need Dad's online banking passwords too? The room went dead silent. Dad's face darkened as he looked at Marcus. You asked for my banking passwords for estate planning purposes, Dad said slowly. You said you needed them to help organize our accounts and make sure everything was properly documented. I did need them for that, Marcus replied, but his voice was getting higher. Then why, I continued, pulling up bank statements on my phone, have you been logging into their accounts regularly, including transfers of money that they don't know about? Mom gasped. What transfers? I handed my phone to Dad, showing him screenshots of his own bank statements that I'd obtained through legitimate means. He'd given me temporary access to help with some medical billing issues months ago, and I'd noticed the suspicious activity. Dad, Look at these transfers from your savings account to a checking account that Marcus opened in his name. Small amounts, but regular. About $200 every 2 weeks for the past 4 months. Dad stared at the screen, his face going from confusion to anger to devastation. Marcus, what is this? I can explain, Marcus said frantically. I was setting aside money for your future care expenses. I opened a separate account to save funds specifically for your medical needs. Without telling us? Mom asked. I wanted it to be a surprise. I was trying to build up a fund so you wouldn't have to worry about expenses if Dad's health declined further. By stealing money from their savings account? I asked. It's not stealing. It's their money being saved for their care. I pulled up another document on my phone. Marcus, is this your car payment? He went pale again. What? This is a loan document for a new car you bought 2 months ago. The down payment was exactly the amount you've taken from Mom and Dad's account. The silence was deafening. Mom and Dad were staring at Marcus like they'd never seen him before. That's a coincidence, Marcus stammered. I had savings for the car down payment. Did you? Because I also have copies of your credit report, which shows you've been carrying significant credit card debt and had no savings before you started accessing Dad's accounts. How do you have copies of my credit report? Marcus demanded. I don't. But I do have copies of loan applications you filled out where you listed Mom and Dad's house as collateral for personal loans. This was the nuclear option, information I discovered accidentally when a financial advisor friend had run into some paperwork discrepancies while helping another client. Marcus had been using our parents' property as collateral for loans they knew nothing about. Marcus, Dad said, his voice dangerously quiet, did you use our house as collateral for loans? It's complicated, Marcus said, looking around the room desperately. I had some temporary financial difficulties, and I knew the loans would be paid off before you ever needed to know about them. You put a lien on our house without our knowledge? Mom whispered. It's just temporary. And it's not like you were ever going to find out unless something went wrong with the loans. Something like you losing your job? I asked quietly. Marcus froze. What? Marcus, I know you were laid off 6 weeks ago. I know you've been lying to Sarah about still having your job. I know you've been using money from Dad's account to make your rent and car payments while pretending to be the stable, responsible son who's stepping up to help the family. The confession came tumbling out then, like a dam bursting. Marcus broke down completely, admitting that he'd lost his job, racked up credit card debt, taken out personal loans using our parents' house as collateral, and had been systematically stealing money from their accounts to cover his expenses. I was going to pay it all back, he sobbed. Once I found a new job, once I got back on my feet, I was going to replace all the money and clear the liens. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. And your plan to move back home? Dad asked. I thought if I was living here, I could help you guys and also get my finances straightened out without having to pay rent. And eventually, if the house became mine, all the loan issues would be resolved anyway. Mom was crying now, not from pride or joy, but from the betrayal of discovering that her son had been systematically defrauding them while presenting himself as their devoted caregiver. Marcus, she said through her tears, how could you do this to us? How could you steal from your own parents? I wasn't stealing. I was borrowing. I was going to pay everything back. With what money? I asked. You've been unemployed for 6 weeks and you just announced a plan to move in with Mom and Dad to avoid paying rent. Where exactly was the money going to come from to pay back what you've taken and clear the liens on their house? Marcus had no answer because there was no answer. His entire plan had been built on the assumption that he could manipulate his way into inheriting our parents' house, which would resolve his financial crimes by making him the legal owner of the property he'd been using as collateral. Dad, I said gently, you need to call your bank tomorrow morning and report unauthorized access to your accounts. You also need to contact a lawyer about the liens Marcus has placed on your house. Rachel, please, Marcus begged. Don't make this into a legal issue. I'm family. I can fix this. You can't fix this, Marcus. You've committed bank fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. These aren't family disputes, they're crimes. But if I go to jail, I'll never be able to pay back what I owe. That's not my problem or Mom and Dad's problem, I replied. That's the consequence of your choices. Dad was staring at the bank statements on my phone, calculating the full scope of what Marcus had stolen. $800, he said quietly. You've taken $800 from our savings over 4 months. It sounds like more than it is, Marcus said desperately. And you've put our house at risk for how much in loans? Mom asked. Marcus mumbled something inaudible. How much, Marcus? $37,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus had put our parents' home, their primary asset and security in retirement, at risk for $37,000 in personal loans while stealing money from their accounts and planning to manipulate his way into inheriting the property that would resolve his crimes. Get out, Dad said quietly. Dad, please. Get out of our house right now. But we can work this out as a family. Marcus, get out of our house. I'd never heard Dad yell like that in my entire life. Marcus looked around the room one more time, searching for any sign of support or sympathy, and found none. As he gathered his things and headed for the door, he turned back to look at me with pure hatred. You've destroyed this family, he said. You've turned our parents against their own son over money. No, Marcus, I replied. You destroyed this family when you decided to steal from your own parents and use their love as a weapon against them. After he left, the three of us sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The pot roast had gone cold, my champagne remained unopened, and our family dinner had turned into a crime scene. I'm so sorry, Mom finally whispered. Rachel, I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening. You couldn't have known, I said gently. Marcus was very careful to present himself as the helpful, responsible son while hiding his real financial situation. But we should have questioned why he was suddenly so interested in our finances, Dad said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. We should have been more careful with our banking information. Dad, you trusted your son. That's not a character flaw, it's what parents are supposed to do. Mom was examining my house documents again, but with different eyes now. Rachel, honey, I understand now why you kept your plans private. You were protecting yourself and your goals from exactly this kind of manipulation. I was also proving to myself that I could accomplish something significant without family support or approval, I admitted. I love you both, but I needed to know I was capable of building a secure future on my own terms. Dad reached across the table and took my hand. You've more than proven that. And Rachel, I want you to know that your financial analysis for our future care, that was thoughtful and thorough in a way that Marcus's supposed planning never was. Because I was actually planning for your well-being, I said. Not for my own financial benefit. We spent the next hour going through the immediate steps they needed to take, calling the bank, contacting a lawyer, reporting the unauthorized account access, and figuring out how to resolve the liens Marcus had placed on their house without destroying their credit or their retirement security. The good news, I told them, is that since the loans were taken out without your knowledge or consent, they're likely fraudulent and can be disputed. It will be complicated and stressful, but your house shouldn't be at risk once the bank understands what happened. And Marcus? Mom asked. That depends on whether you want to press charges, I said honestly. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime, and what he did goes way beyond family disputes. Dad was quiet for a long time before answering. I need to think about that. He's still my son, but what he did. I don't know if I can forgive that level of betrayal. You don't have to decide tonight, I said. But Dad, I want you to understand something. Marcus wasn't planning to pay any of this back. His entire strategy was based on inheriting your house, which would have resolved his financial crimes by making him the legal owner of the property he'd been using as collateral. He was counting on you and Mom not living long enough to discover what he'd done. The implications of that statement settled over us like a dark cloud. Marcus hadn't just been stealing money, He'd been betting on our parents' deaths to cover up his crimes. I think, Mom said finally, that we need to press charges. Not because we want to punish Marcus, but because other families need to be protected from this kind of manipulation. And because, Dad added, Marcus needs to face real consequences for his actions. Our enabling him isn't going to help him become a better person. I reached for the champagne bottle I'd brought to celebrate my house purchase. The evening hadn't gone at all as I'd planned, but somehow it felt right to open it now. What are we toasting? Mom asked as I poured 3 glasses. We're toasting truth, I said. We're toasting the end of secrets and manipulation in this family. We're toasting my new house, your financial security, and the fact that we caught Marcus's crimes before they could destroy your retirement. And we're toasting you, Dad said, raising his glass. To Rachel, who worked 3 jobs and saved every penny to build a secure future, who researched and planned for our care needs without being asked, and who had the courage to expose her brother's crimes even though it was painful and difficult. To family, Mom added, real family, the kind that protects and supports each other instead of manipulating and stealing. As we clinked glasses, I realized that despite the pain and betrayal of the evening, our family was actually stronger now than it had been in years. The secrets were out, the manipulation was exposed, and we could finally build relationships based on honesty rather than assumptions and hidden agendas. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything for a few $1,000s. I showed the message to my parents. Even now, Dad said sadly, he's trying to make himself the victim and minimize what he did. I deleted the message without responding. Marcus had shown us exactly who he was, and we had believed him. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations, bank meetings, and family therapy sessions. True to my prediction, the loans Marcus had taken out using our parents' house as collateral were deemed fraudulent since he had no legal right to use their property for his personal debts. The process of getting the liens removed was complicated but successful. Marcus, meanwhile, had moved in with his girlfriend Sarah, or at least he tried to. According to mutual friends, Sarah had kicked him out within days after learning about his job loss, debt, and fraud. He was apparently staying with various friends and becoming increasingly desperate as his lies caught up with him in every area of his life. I closed on my house as scheduled, and moving into my own space felt even more significant after everything that had happened with my family. For the first time in my adult life, I had a home that was truly mine, with no hidden agendas or family manipulation attached to it. Mom and Dad visited the weekend after I moved in, helping me unpack boxes and marveling at what I'd accomplished. The house wasn't large or fancy, but it was well maintained, in a good neighborhood, and had the art studio space I'd dreamed of having. Rachel, Mom said as we arranged books in my living room, I need to apologize to you for something. What? For all the times we questioned your financial decisions and suggested you weren't being practical about your future. You were being more practical than any of us realized. We just couldn't see it because you were doing it differently than we expected. Mom, you were trying to look out for me. I understand that. But we were also projecting our own fears and assumptions onto your choices, Dad added from where he was assembling a bookshelf. We saw your unconventional career path and assumed you weren't building security, when actually you were building more security than Marcus ever had. It was a fair point. Marcus's stable job and conventional lifestyle had been built on debt and deception, while my multiple income streams and frugal living had created genuine financial stability. I should have been more open about my goals and progress, I admitted. I let pride and past criticism make me secretive when I could have been sharing my success with people who love me. We all made mistakes, Mom said. But we learned from them. The criminal charges against Marcus were filed the following month. Elder financial abuse, identity theft, bank fraud, and unauthorized use of property for collateral. The charges were serious and carried potential jail time. Marcus hired a lawyer and attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming and his pattern of deception was too extensive to minimize. His lawyer contacted my parents multiple times, trying to convince them to drop the charges or testify on Marcus's behalf about his good character and temporary lapse in judgment. They declined. What Marcus did wasn't a temporary lapse in judgment, Dad explained to the lawyer during one particularly pressure-filled phone call. It was a systematic campaign of fraud that lasted for months and put our retirement security at risk. Our son needs to face the consequences of his actions. The most difficult part of the legal process was testifying about the family dynamics that had allowed Marcus's manipulation to succeed for so long. I had to explain how Marcus had positioned himself as the responsible caregiver while systematically stealing from our parents and planning to inherit their house as a reward for his supposed devotion. The defendant used his parents' love and trust as weapons against them, the prosecutor said during her opening statement. He exploited their natural desire to believe the best about their son, and he used their concerns about aging and healthcare as opportunities to gain access to their financial accounts. Marcus's defense was predictable. He claimed he'd been trying to help his parents and had only made mistakes in judgment due to his own financial stress. His lawyer painted him as a devoted son who'd gotten in over his head while trying to provide for his family. But the evidence was too clear and too extensive. Bank records, loan documents, forged signatures, and recorded phone calls where Marcus had lied to financial institutions about his authority to use his parents' property. It all painted a picture of calculated fraud rather than misguided helpfulness. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict him on all charges. At sentencing, Marcus was given 18 months in prison, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution to our parents. He was also required to participate in financial counseling and was barred from having any access to our parents' financial accounts or legal documents in the future. Mr. Johnson, the judge said during sentencing, elder financial abuse is one of the most insidious crimes because it exploits the trust between family members. You used your parents' love as a weapon against them, and you put their retirement security at risk to solve your own financial problems. This sentence reflects not just the monetary damage you caused, but the emotional trauma of betraying the people who raised and trusted you. Marcus's final statement to the court was revealing. Instead of apologizing to our parents or taking responsibility for his actions, he blamed me for turning the family against him and claimed that his financial problems had been temporary and would have resolved themselves if given more time. Even facing prison, he still couldn't acknowledge the reality of what he'd done. After the sentencing, Mom, Dad, and I went out to dinner, not a family dinner with carefully prepared conversation, but a spontaneous celebration of justice and closure. How do you feel? I asked them as we waited for our food. Sad, Mom said immediately. I'm sad that my son made choices that led him to prison. I'm sad that he was willing to steal from us and lie to us for months. But I'm also relieved, Dad added. I'm relieved that we discovered his crimes before they could destroy our retirement security. I'm relieved that he's facing consequences for his actions. And I'm relieved that we learned the truth about both of our children. Both of us. We learned that Marcus, who we thought was the stable, responsible one, was actually living a life built on deception and fraud. And we learned that you, who we worried was impractical and unstable, had actually been building genuine security and success through hard work and sacrifice. Sometimes, Mom said, the child who looks like they're struggling is actually working the hardest. And sometimes the child who looks like they have everything figured out is the one who's really in trouble. 6 months later, I received a letter from Marcus in prison. It was different from his previous attempts at contact, less self-serving, more genuinely remorseful. Rachel, he wrote, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I want you to know that I've been in counseling here, and I'm finally starting to understand what I did to our family. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved and what I thought you didn't deserve that I lost sight of what really mattered, the people I was hurting. The letter went on to acknowledge the specific ways he'd manipulated and deceived our parents, and to express genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused. It ended with a request that surprised me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you can help Mom and Dad understand that the brother who stole from them isn't who I want to be anymore. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it. Not as forgiveness, but as evidence that people can change, and as a reminder that sometimes the most important family loyalty is protecting the people you love from manipulation, even when the manipulator is family. A year and a half after that explosive family dinner, I was hosting my first Thanksgiving in my new house. Mom and Dad were helping me prepare dinner, and for the first time in years, our family gathering felt genuinely peaceful and honest. We'd all changed in fundamental ways since Marcus's crimes were exposed. Mom and Dad had become more careful about their financial security but also more trusting of my judgment and capabilities. I'd learned to share my goals and struggles with them instead of keeping everything private. And all of us had developed a clearer understanding of what healthy family support actually looks like. "Rachel," Mom said as she helped me arrange flowers on the dining room table, "I want you to know how grateful I am that you had the courage to expose what Marcus was doing." It was hard, I admitted. Part of me knew that speaking up would destroy our family as we knew it. But you did it anyway because you knew that the family we thought we had was built on lies and manipulation, Dad added from the kitchen where he was carving turkey. What we have now is smaller but more honest. We'd had many conversations over the past year about Marcus, his crimes, and our complicated feelings about what had happened. The hardest part wasn't anger, it was grief. We were all mourning the loss of the family member we thought we'd known, while trying to figure out how to relate to the family member who actually existed. Marcus had been released from prison 2 months earlier and was living in a halfway house across town. He'd written several letters requesting to see us, and we'd had long discussions about whether and how to respond. "I think I'm ready to see him," Mom had said the week before Thanksgiving. "Not to reconcile or pretend everything is fine, but to see if he's genuinely changed or if he's still the person who was willing to steal from his own parents." "What would convince you that he's changed?" I'd asked. "Accountability without excuses. Understanding of the harm he caused without trying to minimize it. And most importantly, no expectations of forgiveness or restoration of trust." We'd agreed to meet with Marcus the week after Thanksgiving, in a neutral location, with a family therapist present. It would be our first face-to-face conversation since the night he'd been arrested. As we sat down for Thanksgiving dinner in my little house, I reflected on how different my life was from what I'd expected 18 months earlier. I'd thought I was planning a simple announcement about buying my first home. Instead, I'd uncovered a massive financial fraud, sent my brother to prison, and fundamentally changed our family dynamics. But I'd also accomplished something I was genuinely proud of. My house had become a real home, my freelance design business was thriving, and I'd been promoted to senior marketing coordinator at my day job. The financial planning skills I developed during my house hunting process had led to consulting opportunities helping other families organize their finances and estate planning. "You know what I'm most grateful for this year?" Dad said as we passed dishes around the table. "What?" "I'm grateful that we learned the truth while we still had time to protect ourselves and make better decisions." If Marcus's fraud hadn't been discovered until after Mom or I became seriously ill or died, the financial damage could have been devastating. It was sobering to think about how much worse things could have been. Marcus's plan to inherit the house while using it as collateral for loans would have left the surviving parent facing foreclosure and financial ruin in their most vulnerable moments. "I'm grateful that Rachel had the financial literacy and investigative skills to recognize what was happening," Mom added. "And I'm grateful that she cared enough about our well-being to speak up even when it was difficult and painful." "What about you, Rachel?" Dad asked. "What are you most grateful for this year?" I thought about the question while looking around my dining room, at the table I'd bought at an estate sale, the chairs I'd refinished myself, the artwork I'd created in the studio space that had been my dream for years. "I'm grateful that I trusted myself," I said finally. "I'm grateful that I didn't let other people's assumptions about my capabilities define what I thought I could accomplish. And I'm grateful that when I discovered Marcus was stealing from you, I chose to protect you instead of protecting family secrets." "That couldn't have been an easy choice," Mom said. "It wasn't. I knew that exposing Marcus would probably destroy our relationship permanently. But I also knew that letting him continue stealing from you while positioning himself to inherit your house would eventually destroy your financial security. You chose our well-being over family harmony," Dad said. That took real courage. After dinner, we sat in my living room drinking coffee and talking about the upcoming meeting with Marcus. None of us knew what to expect from him or how we'd feel about seeing him again. "I keep wondering if the person who wrote those letters from prison is real," Mom said, "or if it's just another version of the manipulation we lived through before." "I guess we'll find out," I replied. "But I think the important thing is that we're going into it with realistic expectations and clear boundaries." What do you mean? I mean, we're not going to that meeting hoping for a tearful reconciliation where Marcus apologizes and we all become a happy family again. We're going to assess whether he's genuinely changed, and to make decisions about what kind of relationship, if any, we want to have with him going forward. Dad nodded approvingly. And we're going with the understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean trust, and that accepting his apologies doesn't mean accepting him back into our lives without significant safeguards. Exactly. The Marcus who stole from you and planned to inherit your house while betting on your deaths to cover up his crimes. That person can never have access to your finances or your estate planning again. If there's a new Marcus who's genuinely reformed, we'll need to see consistent evidence of that change over a long period of time. And if he's still the same person who blamed everyone else for his problems? Mom asked. Then we'll know that our decision to press charges and maintain distance was the right one, I said. We spent the rest of the evening looking through photo albums, talking about family memories from before Marcus's betrayal had tainted everything. It was bittersweet but also healing, remembering the good times while acknowledging that they'd been built on incomplete understanding of who we all really were. You know, Dad said as they were getting ready to leave, I used to worry that we'd failed as parents because our children were so different from each other. Marcus seemed so responsible and conventional, while you seemed so independent and unconventional. And now? Now I realize that we raised one child who learned to work hard and build genuine security, and one child who learned to manipulate and deceive to get what he wanted. The difference wasn't in how we parented, it was in the choices each of you made about how to handle challenges and pursue your goals. I think, Mom added, that we mistook Marcus's ability to tell us what we wanted to hear for maturity and responsibility. And we mistook your independence and privacy for instability and irresponsibility. Sometimes the child who challenges you the most is actually the one who's developing the strongest character, I said. And sometimes the child who seems easiest to manage is the one who's learning to hide their real problems behind a facade of compliance. As I watched my parents drive away, I felt grateful for the hard lessons we'd all learned over the past year and a half. Our family was smaller now, but it was built on truth rather than assumptions, support rather than manipulation, and genuine care rather than conditional love. Whether Marcus had genuinely changed remained to be seen. But regardless of what happened with him, the three of us had built something authentic and sustainable together, a family based on honesty, respect, and real commitment to each other's well-being. The meeting with Marcus took place on a gray December morning in a family therapy office across town. I arrived early, my parents following shortly after, and we sat together in the waiting room, all of us nervous about seeing the person who had so thoroughly betrayed our trust 18 months earlier. When Marcus walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his hair was shorter, and he carried himself differently, less of the confident swagger I remembered, more cautious and subdued. But what struck me most was his eyes. The calculation and entitlement that had always been there were gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Mom, Dad, Rachel," he said quietly, taking a seat across from us with the therapist between us. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Dr. Sarah Kim, the family therapist we'd been working with, established ground rules for the conversation. This wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness, it was about assessment and communication. Marcus could share what he'd learned during his incarceration and counseling, and we could share our experience of his betrayal and our current boundaries. "Marcus," Dr. Kim began, "why don't you start by telling your family what you've learned about yourself and your actions over the past year and a half?" Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. "I learned that I was living my entire adult life as a lie," he said. "I was so focused on appearing successful and responsible that I never actually developed the skills or character to be successful and responsible." He continued, "When I lost my job, instead of admitting I was struggling and asking for help, I decided to steal from the people who loved me most. And I told myself it was temporary, that I was borrowing, that I would pay it back. But the truth is, I was counting on you dying before you found out what I'd done." The bluntness of that admission hit all of us hard. Mom started crying, but she didn't try to comfort him or minimize what he'd said. "The worst part," Marcus continued, "is that I spent months manipulating your love for me. I used your concerns about aging and health to position myself as your caregiver so I could steal from you more easily. I turned your trust into a weapon against you. Why? Dad asked simply. Because I was entitled and selfish and I couldn't handle the reality that my life wasn't working out the way I'd planned. It was easier to blame Rachel for having opportunities one didn't have than to admit that I'd made bad choices with money and career decisions. Marcus looked at me directly for the first time since the conversation began. Rachel, I owe you a specific apology. I spent years telling myself and our parents that you were irresponsible and unstable because it made me feel better about my own failures. When you bought your house and exposed my crimes, I was furious because you'd proven that everything I'd been saying about you was wrong. I was never trying to prove anything to you, Marcus, I replied. I was just trying to build a secure life for myself. I know that now. And I understand now that the reason you kept your financial planning private wasn't because you were secretive or dishonest, it was because you'd learned that this family didn't always respond supportively to your goals and ambitions. That acknowledgement meant more to me than I'd expected. For years, I'd been made to feel like my privacy about my finances and goals was somehow deceptive, when really it had been protective. Marcus, Mom said, what do you want from us now? I want to earn back some small portion of your trust, he said. Not trust with money or major life decisions. I understand I'll never have that again. But trust that I'm genuinely working to become a person who won't hurt you anymore. What does that look like practically? Dr. Kim asked. It means accepting that I'm not entitled to forgiveness or reconciliation, Marcus replied. It means understanding that I may never be welcome at family gatherings or included in family decisions again. It means accepting that my actions have permanent consequences. And if we decide we don't want a relationship with you going forward? Dad asked. Then I accept that too. I destroyed our family relationships through my own choices. If they can't be rebuilt, that's the consequence of what I did. We talked for another hour about practical issues, Marcus's living situation, his employment prospects, his ongoing counseling, and what limited contact, if any, we might be comfortable with going forward. By the end of the session, I felt like I was seeing a fundamentally different person than the one who had announced his intention to move into our parents' house and claim it as his inheritance. This Marcus took responsibility for his actions, understood the harm he'd caused, and had realistic expectations about consequences. But 18 months of genuine accountability didn't erase years of manipulation and months of theft. I think, I said as the session wrapped up, that we need time to process this conversation and decide individually what kind of relationship, if any, we want to have with you going forward. I understand, Marcus said. And I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to apologize and explain what I've learned. 3 months later, we had our first tentative family dinner since that explosive evening when everything had come to light. Marcus joined us at my parents' house. Not living there, not positioning himself as a caregiver, just visiting for a meal like any adult child might do. The conversation was careful and somewhat stilted, but it was honest in a way our family interactions had never been before. Marcus talked about his job at a nonprofit helping people with financial literacy, a position that seemed to genuinely suit his newfound understanding of money management and personal responsibility. It's ironic, he said over dessert, that I'm now teaching other people how to manage their finances responsibly when I was so terrible at managing my own. Sometimes, Mom said, the best teachers are people who've learned from their own mistakes. It wasn't a full reconciliation. I don't think any of us believed we'd ever have the same relationship we'd had before. But it was a beginning of something new, something built on truth rather than assumptions and manipulation. 6 months after that dinner, Marcus called me with a specific request. Rachel, he said, I want to make a formal apology to you, not just for the financial crimes, but for all the years I spent undermining your confidence and your relationship with Mom and Dad. Okay, I said, not sure where this was leading. I want to write letters to Mom and Dad explaining how I manipulated their perception of you, how I encouraged them to see you as irresponsible and unstable when you were actually building genuine security and success. Why? Because they should understand that their doubts about your financial decisions weren't based on reality, they were based on my manipulation. And because you deserve to have your family understand how hard you worked and how responsibly you planned while I was sabotaging your reputation for my own benefit. The letters, when they came, were detailed and devastating. Marcus laid out exactly how he'd influenced our parents' perception of me, how he'd encouraged their concerns about my unconventional career path, how he'd positioned himself as the stable, reliable son while painting me as the flighty, impractical daughter. Looking back on this entire experience, here's what I learned about family dynamics. Sometimes the person who looks like they have everything together is the one who's falling apart, and sometimes the person who looks like they're struggling is actually working the hardest. Have you ever been in a situation where a family member tried to control the narrative about your life or your capabilities? If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with financial manipulation, family gaslighting, or siblings who tried to steal your inheritance or reputation, please know that you're not alone. Drop a comment about your own experience with family betrayal or financial fraud, because sharing these stories helps other people recognize the warning signs. Hit that like button if you believe that real family supports your success instead of sabotaging it, and subscribe for more stories about exposing manipulation and building authentic relationships. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their achievements are valid even if their family doesn't recognize them. Thank you for following this journey from a simple family dinner announcement to uncovering massive financial fraud and rebuilding family relationships based on truth instead of manipulation. Sometimes the biggest surprises aren't the ones we plan, they're the ones that happen when we finally stop accepting lies as normal family dynamics. Remember, if someone in your family is trying to control financial decisions, isolate you from information, or position themselves as the only responsible option, those are red flags. Trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to seek help from professionals outside the family system. Take care of yourselves, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's simply refusing to let someone else's manipulation define your worth or limit your possibilities.